What's up guys, Mel here back in the studio. Today I have a super interesting remake. I'm super happy with how this turned out. This is a remake of Brooks' remix of Close by, this is my remake of Brooks' remix of Close by Izecold. And the reason I say it's a really interesting remake is because this is like his old classic style of the classic Brooks sound, right when he started using like these super aggressive saws, but also with this iconic Brooks pluck that everyone's talking about. And I've heard a lot of people asking how that pluck is made, and I finally figured it out, or at least I think I got pretty close to the original sound. So I'm super excited to show you guys. Without further ado, let's jump into the project and I'll show you how it's done. So let's talk about the leads. These leads are actually broken up into sort of three parts. First, there's the main lead, then there's the second lead, which joins into the main lead just to switch up the sound a little bit, and then finally there's the third lead, which is that pluck I was talking about. The main lead is just all in sort of one pattern. These are the main synths right here. I have them all on a layer. It consists of these three synths right here, all in silent 1. The first one is from my sound bank. It's called Lead Feel Good. It's the lead that I created for my remake of Feel Good. It sounds like this. That's sort of the main sound. Under here, I have a supporting layer, which I actually just created from scratch for this remake. It's super distorted. It's a bandpass with some white noise, so it just like sounds really gritty. So that just kind of gives the sound some more body. And then finally, down here, I have another preset for my sound bank. It's called Ducky Wide, and it sounds like this. It's kind of thin further out to the side and just gives the lead a bit more width and kind of characteristic. So that's, like I said, the first sort of main layer of the lead. And the second part that I was talking about before is down here. It's actually in a separate layer. It's following along actually with the main melody of the lead, but it just has a couple different synths to give a little more characteristic on just some specific notes. I have two layers that are playing the sound, and they sound like this together. The first one is another one from my sound bank. It's called Lead Gritty Bandpass. Just kind of like this fat lower, just gives some low end to the sound. And then the second one is pretty much like it's called Lead Tremor. It sounds pretty much like the tremor lead that Martin Garrix uses. They're two very similar sounds, but I just wanted them to add up just on this very specific note to give it a little bit more low end. Now comes the second part of the lead, which is that pluck that everyone wants to know about. It sounds like this. So to create this sort of plucky sound, again, I just use silent 1, and it has two layers. This is the first layer. It's actually a layer that I have from my sound bank. It's a layer that I created a long time ago for my sound bank to kind of mimic this sound. It sounds like this. Like I said, I'd created it a long time ago, and at the time I thought it sounded pretty good. I still think it sounds okay, but it's just missing kind of that high end and a little bit of that texture. So for this remake specifically, I went ahead and just created this new lead, which gives it a lot more high end. It sounds like this. So that sound by itself, again, it doesn't sound perfect, but it does have that high end. Pretty much what's happening is this sound here is giving it that high end, that really punchy sort of attacky sound. And then this first sound that I showed you is giving it kind of the body and more grittiness. What I actually did is I put the pitch AB here, and then I turned it up to a really high rate. So it's essentially the pitch of the oscillators are going up and down super fast. So it gives it that really like weird, gnarly, it's kind of hard to describe it, but it just gives it like that super dirty sound. I also distorted the sound, added a little chorus. And so then together, both sounds, they just fit really nicely together. As far as processing goes for the leads, I have the main leads and then the plucks separated out into two different buses here. For the leads, it's really nothing complicated, just a tiny bit of EQ with a little bit of mids and a little bit of highs added. A tiny bit of distortion, really not much. A stereo enhancer, which I have on an automation clip. It's just adjusting the width of the leads just a tiny bit throughout the track. Below that, I have peak controller and reverb. So that's just putting a little bit of reverb on the leads just to give it a little space. And then finally, one last just kind of corrective EQ just to shape the sound a tiny bit more. Going over to the plucks, again, it's not too complicated. I just have an EQ, mostly cutting out the low end. Under that, I have some distortion, just like I did on the main leads. I have a transient processor just to give it a little more attack, just to really punch through. Stereo enhancer just to widen them up a tiny bit. Sausage fattener just to make it just a little bit, that extra bit aggressive. And then lastly, I have reverb, again controlled by the peak controller, just so it's ducking down when the sound plays. Okay, so same story for the bass. I have my main layer, I have some growls, I have some extra growls, and the sub. So a couple different layers, just like I did with the leads. This is the main layer of bass. Oftentimes I will use Silent One and Serum. I actually have this Silent One here, but I'm not actually using it. So all the layers of this bass are just Serum. They're just a bunch of different presets I grabbed from my sound bank. I can play some individually if you want to hear. So there are a couple of layers, but like I said, they're all from my sound bank. So I literally went through and just picked a bunch of random sounds out. So that's the main layer. Then under it, I have some one-shots. This is a one-shot that I just use in almost all of my projects. It's just from the Fusion sample pack. And then under here, on the very first note of the drop, just to give it a big, like, growly sound, I layered a couple more sounds from my sound bank that are more kind of aggressive and growly. I think I have a couple different layers here, 3 different layers. I called it first hit. This is the first one. It's just a growly preset that I have in my sound bank. Here's the second one, really gritty, sort of a lot of high-end texture. And then this third one, I actually really like this preset. It's just, yeah, sounds super nice, really fat. And just because I like to overdo everything, I added one more sample under that just to kind of add to the synths, and it sounds like this. And finally, last but not least, you guys always know what it is. It's the sub bass. For processing on the basses, it's pretty simple. I pretty much process my basses all the same way, just some EQ, OTT, Camel Crusher. I'm just kind of squishing them all together and distorting them a little bit. I separated out my growls just with a little EQ and a little bit of stereo enhancer. I just wanted to widen it out a tiny bit for that initial hit. My sub bass, yeah, just cutting out the high end, adding some distortion, and then all of those get sent to a bass bus, and it's really nothing complicated. I just like to sometimes process my basses all together. In this case, I just wanted to add a little bit more high end just to really bring out the texture of those basses. So those are almost all the elements of the melodic sort of stuff, but there's a couple little things before we move on to the drums that I want to talk about. So what I've gone ahead and done here, I just found this little one shot. It's pitched slightly differently here, but it just kind of gives like an offbeat rhythm. If I just play the bass without these, you'll hear it's just pretty straightforward. And then if you add these, it just kind of switches it up a little bit, gives the track a bit more rhythm. And if I add the leads, you can kind of hear in the context of the track what it sounds like too. It just gives that da, 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 da. And then if we come to the middle here, then this is just the fill. I just created some super simple saw chords with some weird effects on them, and they sound like this. For the drums, it's pretty straightforward. What I have here, of course, is the kick and clap. I added a little offbeat tom in a couple sections. And then down here, just some really simple like white noise sweeps and a couple different effects. A couple little fills here. The one thing I do want to tell you about, which is kind of interesting, and it took me a little bit to make it, but I finally figured it out and got it to sound like I wanted. And that is this riser in the second half. If you know this track well, you'll know this kind of weird riser. It has a funky sound to it, but it sounds really cool. Like this weird kind of vocally sort of sound to it. So let me show you how I made that really quickly. The sound itself is actually fairly simple. It's just a one saw oscillator, and then it has some white noise on it, and then it's really distorted just so it gives it that super crunchy feeling. But the magic of this riser comes from the processing. If I turn off the processing, you can hear it doesn't sound too much different for most of the time. And then let me turn the processing back on. So here is the magic that I did, and it's actually pretty simple. I have an EQ here, which is just shaping the sound originally. Fruited distortion, it's just making the sound kind of more fat and distorted, obviously. Tiny bit of reverb just to give it space. And then this is the plugin that is making the sort of magic happen. Let me just play this for you, and you can see what's going on. This is more or less like a bandpass. Obviously, it's not a complete bandpass, but it's just like a big, super high resonant frequency. And so what I'm doing is I'm actually automating this where it sweeps up and then sweeps down really fast. So I have that automated, but then obviously because I don't want it to like screw up the sound for the rest of the time, then I also have the whole EQ automated. You can see that this is an automation clip to turn that EQ on and off. So for this sound here, it's off, it's not affecting the sound. And then here it turns on, and up one, this automation clip right here, that is the automation clip that is affecting the frequency of the resonant frequency. So it's kind of sweeping up and down. You know, if I wanted to, I could go like this, or I could go like this. I just played around with it until it sounded the way I wanted it to and tried to match the original track, obviously. And then it's almost the exact same version over here. I just, since it's on a different note, I have it a slightly different automation clip. So yeah, that was fun to make, fun to try to recreate. And I just wanted to show you guys because it's kind of an interesting little tip on just how to take a super simple sound and make it into something a bit unique. But that is pretty much the entire track. If I missed anything, as always, feel free to write me down in the comments below and ask me. Or as always, the FLP will be available down in the description as well. So if you have any questions about the sound design or anything, you can just download the FLP and actually figure it out for yourself, kind of reverse engineer how I made all these sounds. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in. Hope you guys enjoyed, hope you guys learned something. And as always, I'll catch you back in the next video. And without further ado, here is the full playthrough of this remake.